On May 29th, 2012, a janitor was making his usual rounds behind an apartment building in Montreal, Canada. It was a regular morning, just like any other. But then he saw something that made his blood run cold. A black suitcase, abandoned next to the trash. He figured someone had just thrown it out. But something was off. A smell he couldn't ignore. When he opened that suitcase, what he found inside would change his life forever. And it would also change the way the world understood the evil that can exist on the internet. Inside that suitcase was a human torso. No head, no arms, no legs, just a torso. And that was only the beginning. Because that same day, at the Conservative Party of Canada headquarters, an employee was opening a package that had arrived through regular mail. Inside was a box, and inside that box, a human hand and a foot. An identical package showed up at the Liberal Party offices, and days later, 2 schools in Vancouver received similar packages. Someone was mailing human body parts, like some kind of sick gift, like they wanted the whole world to know. Who would do something like this? And why? The answer to those questions takes us to one of the most disturbing cases in modern criminal history. A case involving a killer who craved fame at any cost. A case that started with videos of animal cruelty on the internet. A case where a group of ordinary people online tried to stop a monster before he killed someone, and they failed. This is the story of Luca Rocco Magnotta. The man who dismembered a college student recorded the whole thing on video, uploaded it to the internet, and then mailed body parts to politicians and schools. And the most chilling part of all, he wanted to get caught. But before we understand how it all ended, we need to understand how it started. And for that, we have to go back several years. We need to know the victim, we need to know the killer. And we need to understand the dark corners of the internet that connected their fates in the most horrific way possible. Jun Lin was born in China in 1978. He was a quiet, studious young man with big dreams. From an early age, his parents noticed he was different from other kids. He wasn't interested in games or getting into trouble. What he loved was learning, reading books, understanding how things worked. He grew up in a modest family, but one full of love. His parents worked hard to give him a good education, and Jun Lin didn't let them down. He was an outstanding student, always getting good grades, always making plans for the future. When he turned 30, Jun Lin made a decision that would change his life. He wanted to study abroad. He wanted to broaden his horizons. He wanted to see the world beyond China. In 2010, at 32 years old, Jun Lin arrived in Canada. His destination was Montreal, a city known for its cultural diversity and prestigious universities. He enrolled at Concordia University to study computer engineering. For Jun Lin, Canada represented a fresh start, a new beginning, a chance to build an international career and eventually help his family from afar. The first few months weren't easy. The language was a barrier. The weather was completely different from anything he'd ever known. Canadian winters were brutal, with below-zero temperatures and snow covering everything for months. But Jun Lin was resilient. He was determined. He didn't complain. He just worked harder. To pay for school and living expenses, he got a part-time job at a convenience store. It wasn't glamorous work. He spent hours behind the counter, helping customers, stocking shelves, cleaning up. But he did it with a smile. His co-workers described him as kind, polite, always willing to help out. At school, Jun Lin was known for being quiet but dedicated. He wasn't the type to seek the spotlight. He preferred to focus on his studies. He spent long hours in the library, prepping for exams, working on projects. His professors respected him. His classmates appreciated him. He was the kind of person who never caused problems. The kind of person who just wanted to do things right. But Jun Lin also had another side, a more adventurous side. He liked to explore, meet new people, try new things. Montreal is a vibrant city. It's got an active cultural scene, bars, restaurants, events. And Jun Lin, after so many years of being the perfect student, wanted to enjoy life a little. There's nothing wrong with that. It's completely normal. A guy in his 30s in a new country wanting to meet people and have some fun. But that search for new experiences would lead him to cross paths with the wrong person. The worst possible person. At some point in 2012, Jun Lin met someone online. Someone who seemed interesting. Someone who seemed charming. That someone was Luca Rocco Magnotta. And that meeting would seal Jun Lin's fate in the most horrific way imaginable. But before we get to that fateful encounter, we need to understand who Luca Magnotta really was. Because this wasn't your average killer. This was someone who had been throwing up red flags for years. Red flags that many people saw, red flags that some tried to report, and nobody did anything. Luca Rocco Magnotta wasn't always called that. He was born on July 24th, 1982, in Scarborough, Ontario, Canada, with the name Eric Clinton Kirk Newman. It was a common name, a name that didn't stand out. But from a young age, Eric wanted to stand out. He wanted to be special. He wanted to be famous. His childhood wasn't easy. He grew up in a dysfunctional home. His father had mental health issues. His mother struggled to keep the family afloat. There was violence. There was neglect. There was trauma. Psychologists who later evaluated Magnotta noted that from a very early age he showed troubling signs. He lied compulsively. He made up elaborate stories about himself. He constantly sought attention and validation. As a teenager, Eric started showing interest in fashion and modelling. He wanted to be a model. He wanted to be in magazines. He wanted the world to see him. At 21, he made a drastic decision. He legally changed his name. He would no longer be Eric Clinton Kirk Newman. Now he would be Luca Rocco Magnotta, a name that sounded more exotic, more memorable, more special. Magnotta tried to break into the modelling industry, but without much success. He landed small gigs, minor ads, nothing that would bring him the fame he so desperately wanted. So he found another way to get attention: the internet. In the 2000s, social media was starting to blow up. MySpace, Facebook, YouTube. Everyone wanted an online presence. Everyone wanted to be seen. But Magnotta took it to a different level. He started creating multiple fake profiles. Dozens of different accounts. On some, he pretended to be other people. On others, he spread rumours about himself. And here's where it gets weird. A lot of those rumours he spread were negative. He'd say he'd dated celebrities, that he was involved in scandals, that he was wanted by the police. It seemed like he didn't care whether the attention was good or bad, he just wanted attention, at any cost. Magnotta also got into the adult entertainment industry. He appeared in some videos. He tried to use that as a platform to gain more fame, but nothing worked. He was still a nobody. Just another face among millions. Then, sometime around 2010, Magnotta found a new way to get attention, a much darker way. He started posting videos of animal cruelty on the internet. The first of these videos appeared in December 2010. It was simply called One Boy, Two Kittens. The content was exactly what the title suggested. A video where someone tortured and killed two kittens in a horrific way. The video spread quickly through the darker corners of the internet. Forums dedicated to disturbing content. Sites where people shared graphic material. The reaction was mixed. Some were horrified. Others unfortunately found it entertaining. And some, a very specific group of people, decided they had to do something about it. This group was made up mostly of animal lovers. People who couldn't stand to see that kind of cruelty and just sit on their hands. They organised mainly on Facebook. They created groups dedicated to identifying whoever was responsible for the videos. They analysed every detail, the background of the rooms, visible objects, the accent of any voice that could be heard. It was like a police investigation, but carried out by regular citizens, by people who simply couldn't tolerate that level of evil. And eventually they identified a suspect, Luca Rocco Magnotta. The clues were numerous. Some recognised elements from videos Magnotta had posted on his social media. The decor of his apartment, his pet cat, small details that matched up. Plus, Magnotta had an online history. He'd been linked to strange behaviour before, he'd created fake profiles, he'd spread rumours about himself. Everything seemed to fit. The internet investigators contacted the authorities. They sent emails to the Toronto police, to the Montreal police, to any authority who would listen. But the responses were discouraging. The police said there wasn't enough evidence, that they couldn't positively identify the person in the videos, that without more concrete information their hands were tied. It was frustrating, it was maddening. These people knew, deep in their gut, that Magnotta was responsible, and they knew something else. They knew this was just the beginning, because in the forums where these videos were being discussed there were rumours. Rumours that the creator of these videos was planning something bigger, something involving a person. One of the internet investigators, a woman from Las Vegas who went by the username BowdyMoven, expressed her concern clearly. This guy is going to kill someone. It's only a matter of time. She was right, but nobody listened. Months passed. Magnotta continued his life, continued posting on social media, continued seeking attention. And then, in May 2012, everything changed. Jun Lin and Luca Magnotta met through the internet. The exact details of how they connected aren't completely clear, but what is known is that Magnotta used dating apps and websites to meet people. Magnotta was manipulative. He knew how to present himself. He knew how to seem charming and interesting. He knew how to gain people's trust. Jun Lin, for his part, was a lonely young man in a foreign country. He was looking for connection, looking for companionship. He had no way of knowing that the person he was talking to was a predator. At some point in May 2012, Jun Lin agreed to visit Magnotta's apartment. The apartment was located in a building on Dequebre Street in Montreal. An ordinary building, a small apartment. What happened inside that apartment in the early hours of May 25, 2012, is known with certainty only to Luca Magnotta, and he recorded the whole thing. According to evidence presented later at trial, Magnotta had prepared everything in advance. He had a camera ready, he had tools, he had a plan. Jun Lin arrived at the apartment without suspecting a thing. He probably thought it was a normal date. He probably thought he'd have a nice evening with someone he'd met online, but when he got there, Magnotta attacked him. What followed was an act of extreme violence that I'd rather not describe in detail. Suffice it to say that Jun Lin was murdered in a brutal manner. He was stabbed multiple times, he was strangled, he was tortured, and Magnotta recorded everything. The video that resulted from this was titled "One Lunatic, One Ice Pick" and was uploaded to a website dedicated to gore content. The same type of site where Magnotta had posted his animal cruelty videos, but Magnotta didn't stop there. After killing Jun Lin, he proceeded to dismember his body. He did it methodically, like it was a task he had planned and practiced. He cut off the head, he cut off the arms, he cut off the legs, he separated the torso, and then he started distributing the parts. The torso was placed in a black suitcase and left next to the trash behind his apartment building. This was the suitcase the janitor would find days later. The hands and feet were carefully packaged and mailed. 2 packages went to the headquarters of Canada's major political parties, the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party. 2 other packages were sent to elementary schools in Vancouver. The head and one of the hands were never found during the initial investigation. They were discovered months later in different locations. Magnotta wanted the whole world to know what he had done. He wanted to be famous. Finally, after years of trying to get attention, he had found a way to do it, and it worked, but not the way he expected. On May 29, 2012, 4 days after the murder, Jun Lin's body began to be discovered. First came the janitor who found the suitcase with the torso. When he opened that suitcase and saw what was inside, he immediately called the police. The officers who arrived at the scene were in shock. In all their years on the job, they had never seen anything like this. A human torso without limbs, without a head, packed in a suitcase like it was luggage. The building was immediately cordoned off. An investigation was launched. Detectives started knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen anything suspicious in recent days. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, the packages with the body parts were arriving at their destinations. At the Conservative Party offices in Ottawa, an employee opened a package that looked normal. A cardboard box, nothing particularly suspicious on the outside. But when he opened it and saw what was inside, he screamed and stumbled backward in horror. It was a human hand and a foot. Authorities were called immediately. The building was evacuated. Specialized teams were brought in to handle the situation. A similar package arrived at the Liberal Party offices. Same contents, same horror. The Ottawa police immediately contacted the Montreal police. This couldn't be a coincidence. A torso found in Montreal. Body parts mailed to Ottawa. This was clearly the work of the same person. What followed was one of the most intense police investigations in Canadian history. The first step was identifying the victim. The torso had no ID. There was no immediate way to know who this person was. But investigators had leads. The apartment where the suitcase was found had tenants. One of them, according to building records, was a man named Luca Magnotta. When detectives entered Magnotta's apartment, what they found was a nightmare scene. There was blood everywhere, on the walls, on the floor, on the furniture. Clearly something terrible had happened there. They also found the video. One Lunatic, One Ice Pick was already circulating on the internet, but the police hadn't seen it yet. When they finally watched it, they understood the magnitude of what they were dealing with. This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It wasn't an impulsive act. This was something completely different. This was a murder that was planned, executed, and documented by someone who wanted the whole world to see it. And the killer had fled. Magnotta had planned his escape with the same precision he'd used to plan the murder. He had passports, he had money, he had a route mapped out. The same day the body parts started being discovered, Magnotta was already out of Canada. He had taken a flight from Montreal to Paris, France. From there, he moved around Europe. He visited different cities. He changed his appearance. He tried to lay low, but there was a problem with his plan. Magnotta couldn't stay away from the internet. Despite being on the run, despite being wanted by police in multiple countries, Magnotta couldn't resist the temptation to see what people were saying about him. He'd go into internet cafes, he'd Google his own name, he'd read the news about the case, he'd watch as the whole world talked about him. He was finally famous. Everyone finally knew his name. Meanwhile, Canadian police had issued an Interpol alert, a red notice, the highest level of international alert. Magnotta was now one of the most wanted men in the world. His photo was on every newscast. His name was in every newspaper. Airports, train stations, border crossings, they all had his picture and orders to detain him on site. The pressure was mounting, the net was closing in. On June 4th, 2012, barely a week after Jun Lin's body was discovered, Magnotta was found. He was in an internet cafe in Berlin, Germany, sitting in front of a computer doing exactly what he couldn't stop doing, reading news about himself. An employee at the cafe recognized him. He'd seen his photo on the news. This guy sitting at the computer looked a lot like the Canadian killer everyone was looking for. The employee quietly called the police. When officers arrived, Magnotta didn't resist. He simply said, "You're looking for me. I'm Luca Magnotta." He was arrested on the spot. The manhunt was over, but the story was far from finished. After his arrest in Berlin, a lengthy legal process began. Canada formally requested Magnotta's extradition so he could be tried for his crimes. Magnotta, for his part, fought against the extradition, not because he wanted to avoid trial, not because he thought he could escape justice, but because, as he himself later admitted, he wanted to drag out the process as long as possible. Why? Because the longer the process took, the longer he'd be in the news, the longer he'd be the centre of attention, the longer he'd be famous. Even in custody, even facing murder charges, Magnotta was still obsessed with fame. The extradition process lasted several months. During that time, Magnotta was held in a German prison. Media outlets from around the world followed every detail of the case. Finally, in June 2012, Germany approved the extradition. Magnotta was sent back to Canada to face charges. When he landed in Montreal, a media circus was waiting for him. TV cameras, reporters shouting questions, helicopters overhead. Magnotta walked toward the police vehicle with an expression that many described as satisfied. He was enjoying this. Every second of attention, every camera flash. It was exactly what he had always wanted. The case against Magnotta was overwhelming. The police had the murder video, which Magnotta himself had recorded and uploaded to the internet, physical evidence from the apartment, blood, tools, DNA traces, witness testimony from people who had seen him in the days before and after the crime, travel records showing his escape from Canada, Jun Lin's body parts, including the ones he had mailed himself. It was an open and shut case. Any defense attorney would face an almost impossible task. But Magnotta had a plan. He wasn't going to deny committing the acts. That would be pointless since everything was recorded on video. Instead, his defense would be something else. He was going to claim he was insane. Specifically, his legal team would argue that Magnotta suffered from schizophrenia, that at the time of the crime, he was unable to distinguish right from wrong, that he was not criminally responsible due to his mental disorder. This legal strategy is known in Canada as not criminally responsible on account of mental disorder, or NCR. If Magnotta was found NCR, he wouldn't go to prison. He would be sent to a psychiatric hospital. And eventually, if doctors determined he was no longer a danger, he could be released. It was a risky bet. But for Magnotta, it was the only option. The trial of Luca Rocco Magnotta began on September the 29th, 2014, more than 2 years after Jun Lin's murder. The setting was the Montreal courthouse. An imposing building that had seen many important cases over the years, but none like this one. The courtroom was packed. Journalists from around the world had come to cover the event. Family members of the victim were present, including Jun Lin's parents, who had travelled from China to witness the trial of the man who had murdered their son. The jury was made up of 12 ordinary people, Canadian citizens who would have to listen to the most horrific details of the case and then decide Magnotta's fate. From the start, the defence admitted that Magnotta had committed the acts. There was no way to deny it. The video existed. The physical evidence existed. Magnotta himself had confessed. But the defence attorneys argued Magnotta was not criminally responsible. He suffered from schizophrenia. At the time of the crime, he was experiencing a psychotic episode. He didn't know what he was doing. He couldn't control his actions. The prosecution, on the other hand, painted a very different picture. They argued that the crime had been meticulously planned. Magnotta had purchased the tools he used to dismember the body in advance. He had set up the camera to record. He had planned his escape with passports and money ready to go. This was not the behaviour of someone who didn't know what he was doing. This was the behaviour of a calculating killer who had planned every detail. Furthermore, the prosecution presented evidence of Magnotta's personality. His obsession with fame, his years of manipulative behaviour online, his previous videos of animal cruelty. This was a pattern, they argued. A pattern of behaviour that culminated in murder. Not a mental illness spiralling out of control, but a deliberate escalation. During the trial, multiple psychiatrists testified. Some testified for the defence, saying that Magnotta did indeed suffer from schizophrenia and that this had affected his judgment. Others testified for the prosecution, saying that while Magnotta might have certain personality disorders, he was fully capable of distinguishing right from wrong and controlling his actions. The testimonies were technical, complicated, sometimes contradictory, but the jury wasn't there just to listen to experts. They were also there to see the evidence, and the most impactful evidence of all was the video. One lunatic, one ice pick was shown to the jury. Not in its entirety, because that would be too disturbing, but key fragments were shown. The jury members had to see what Magnotta had done. They had to see the violence, the brutality, the cold indifference with which Magnotta carried out the murder and dismemberment. Some jury members cried, others had to look away. It was a traumatic experience for everyone present, but it was necessary to understand the magnitude of what had happened, to be able to make a fair decision. The trial lasted approximately 10 weeks. 10 weeks of testimony, evidence, and legal arguments. And finally, the moment came for the jury to deliberate. On December the 23rd, 2014, after 8 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom was silent. Everyone was holding their breath. Jun Lin's parents sat together, holding hands, waiting for the outcome. Magnotta stood facing the jury. His expression was hard to read. Was he nervous? Confident? No one could say for sure. The jury foreman stood and read the verdict. First-degree murder charge. Guilty. Committing indignities to a human body. Guilty. Publishing obscene material. Guilty. Mailing obscene material. Guilty. Criminal harassment. Guilty. Guilty on all counts. The jury had rejected the mental illness defence. They had determined that Magnotta knew exactly what he was doing when he killed Jun Lin. He was criminally responsible for his actions. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Jun Lin's parents embraced, crying. Finally, after more than 2 years of waiting, there was justice for their son. Magnotta, for his part, showed no visible reaction. He just stood there, staring straight ahead. The sentencing would come days later. On December 23, 2014, the same day as the verdict, the judge pronounced the sentence. For the charge of first-degree murder, Luca Rocco Magnotta was sentenced to life in prison. In Canada, this means a minimum of 25 years before being eligible for parole. For the other charges, he received additional sentences to be served concurrently. In practical terms, this means Magnotta won't be eligible to apply for parole until 2039 at the earliest. And given the nature of his crimes, it's highly unlikely he'll ever be released. Before the sentence was read, Jun Lin's family members had the opportunity to make victim impact statements. Statements where they could express how the crime had affected their lives. Jun Lin's father spoke through a translator. His words were heartbreaking. He spoke about his son, about his dreams, about how hard he had worked to go study in Canada, about how proud the whole family was of him, and he spoke about the pain of losing his only son in such a horrible way, the pain of having to watch fragments of the video during the trial, the pain of knowing his son spent his final moments in terror and agony. "I lost my son," the father said. "I lost my future. I can't eat, I can't sleep. I think about him every day." Jun Lin's mother also spoke. She was crying as she did. "My son was a good boy," she said. "He never did anything wrong. Why did this happen to him? Why?" There was no answer to that question. There was nothing that could explain or justify what Magnotta had done. The judge, after hearing the impact statements, addressed Magnotta. "What you did," the judge said, "is the most horrible thing this court has ever seen. You planned this crime, you carried it out, you recorded it, you posted it for the whole world to see, and then you mailed parts of your victim's body, like it was some kind of game. There is no excuse for what you did. there is no justification, and there is no forgiveness. Magnotta was escorted out of the courtroom to begin serving his sentence. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and drop a comment to keep the conversation going. See you in the next episode.